But appreciate everyone for taking some time today to join us. Thank you to our three panelists, Izzy Rosenzweig, the founder and CEO of Portless, Mo Afshar, the CEO and co-founder of Pipe17, and Madeline Heartt. Is that how you spell it? Heartt.
Heart.
Heartt. Almost like my name. A lot of the same letters there. Madeline Heartt, the senior director of sales and of sales operations at ILIA Beauty. So really excited for the three of you to join. We'll kind of kick off with just quick intros. Want to kind of hear who you are, what your companies do, or what your companies are, and what how you support those businesses, and then we'll kind of dig into a few topical questions on just kind of the state of e-commerce and logistics, as well as some questions about 2026 and what to expect. So with that said, maybe we'll kind of kick off with some brief intros. We'll go Mo, Madeline, and Izzy, and then we'll kick off some questions. So Mo, why don't you take it?
Fantastic. It was great to be with you, Matt, and with some really good friends around the table today at the end of the year. I hope everybody's had a great year. We are Pipe17, so we unify everything after the checkout button. And what that means is we live our day and night in operations, and our goal is to radically simplify operations for everybody. So the operations is easy for all the brands, retailers, and logistics providers out there.
Thanks, Mo. Madeline?
Thank you for having me. I am Madeline. I'm from ILIA Beauty. We're a pioneering clean beauty company. We've been around for almost 15 years. We're in Sephora, Ulta, and also in many Sephoras worldwide, as well as many of our other amazing retailers and also on .com. And I oversee fulfillment, our tech stack, and our 3PL inventory.
Awesome. Everyone, first of all, Matt, thanks for hosting this. My name is Izzy Rosenzweig. I'm CEO and founder at Portless. Portless is I would call it modern supply chain business model. So brands typically manufacture goods, put on a boat, wait 2 months, then sell their goods. Our model is we keep your goods in China or Vietnam. We have 4 facilities. And once you get an order, we'll pick, pack, and deliver that order in our priority line, about 5.5 days to the customer, standard about 7.5 days. Fully local experience, USPS, Uni, on track with those guys. So very normal experience for the consumer and a ton of cash flow and agility efficiencies for the brand.
Thanks, Izzy. Yeah, it's really. I mean, they're all Mo's business, Pipe17, as well as Portless and ILIA Beauty are all really fascinating businesses. But Izzy and I got to know each other a couple of years ago. When I first heard of his model, I was like, oh gosh, this is actually really interesting, really unique. Again, all unique models, but yeah, I continue to be fascinated with what Izzy is doing. One other thing before we really kick things off, I always like to disclose when I have a personal interest in any business's success. And while Izzy and Madeline are both friends of mine, and I wish them both much success personally as well as profession, for their businesses. I do have a small investment in Pipe17. Mo and I got to know each other when he was launching the business many years ago. So just want to establish that. So with that said, want to kind of get into some things. It's December 10th, a couple of weeks into peak, a couple of weeks remaining. If we sort of define the end of peak as being kind of Christmas Day, although I think for high growth businesses, it seems to be always peak, and there's always events that come up as we've seen this year and in prior years. But we'll love just to maybe go around the horn. Maybe Madeline, I'll put you on the spot first, but we'll love to kind of hear how peak is going. Feel free not to share anything confidential about the business, as much or as little as you like, but curious just to kind of hear what you're seeing through ILIA Beauty, as well as maybe other operator friends of yours at other companies. What sort of the state of the consumer? People continue to place orders. What are things looking like for y'all?
Yeah, overall, peak went really well for us this year. We are a really well-oiled machine at this point at peak. And also participating in what feels like a longer and longer Black Friday event every year. This is actually something that in fulfillment we quite love because we are spreading out our fulfillment volume over many days as opposed to crushing 20,000 orders in a day, and having to work with logistics on and overtime and all that kind of stuff to keep up. So that's something that we're seeing that's really positive in the Black Friday, Cyber Monday peak market, that makes it more sustainable for us while also still remaining on track with our revenue targets. We actually came in a little over our target this year, which was a wonderful surprise for us. And also actually reducing our total order volume, which means that customers were adding more to their cart in one go, which was also a really pleasant surprise. We also experienced a lot of issues on the data side. While we thought we were really well prepared, we made some really significant changes to our tech stack this year, and we ended up in a really bad data concurrency issue that we caught a little too late. That was really challenging for us to recover from because you can't necessarily always open your data freeway as fast as possible. So while our warehouses were keeping up with the volume in really spectacular fashion, our systems weren't. And that degraded our customer experience because we weren't able to tell them that their order was on the way. So that's a huge takeaway for us next year as we continue to evolve our tech stack, is really start thinking about how do we account for that extra volume, extra integrations, and make sure that we're not creating that it felt a little silly for us to get tripped up by that. The last time we got tripped up by it was in 2021 when we were a much, much, much smaller company. So overall, it went really well, but if I could wave a magic wand and go back, I would definitely be changing my concurrency limits way before.
Mo, I'm sure you have some things to
Yeah.
say about that.
Yeah, well, concurrency limits. Yes, definitely you should increase your concurrency limits on your ERP holidays. But I think the thing certainly that we've seen a couple of trends. I mean, our business is growing rapidly, so we more than doubled our business year to year. But some of the interesting trends we saw, one of them was the GMV is basically lagging the order volume. So what that's telling you a little bit is obviously there's a combination of, the average cart value being lower and, potentially some discounting. And we haven't heard much about discounting, but certainly in our customer base, we've seen that to be true, which is kind of super interesting for me because you kind of would have expected that given all the turmoil that's gone on this year, you'd expect to see a little bit of degradation in that customer spending. And that's kind of generally what we've seen in that overall thing. But I think in terms of, brand success, I mean, we run thousands of brands on our platform. And the good news is, they did really, really well. So I think, we've seen, despite, the upheavals and, tariffs on and off and all these kind of things, the US consumer has been resilient, which is a great part of the US economy, despite all of the turmoil.
Yeah, and Izzy, you work with a lot of U.S. brands that are manufacturing overseas, namely China, that are shipping directly into the U.S. as well as to other countries, right? And you inevitably support many non-U.S. brands, so you have a really interesting perspective on both the health of the U.S. consumer or brand, and I suppose consumer as well as non-U.S. So yeah, curious what you've been seeing over the last couple of weeks as peak order volume has picked up.
So I would agree with both Mo and Madeline in the sense that like the dollars are coming in, the GMV is definitely growing. I don't know what it means for the brands. The brand still had rise of cost. You can't fight rise of cost. So the consumer is spending, but the profitability of the brands, I think, is still a little unclear. Their cost goes up. How many of them raise prices to make up for that loss of gross margin? How them kept it so they can move inventory? But I would say overall, the dollar and shipping is way higher than last year than from the brands that we serviced last year, and then new brands that we work with them and see their data. Another big shift for our customers is a very big push into international markets. International used to be about 25% of all our shipments. international meaning outside the US, now it's 40%. So there's definitely been a push into brands going global. Again, we're uniquely positioned to help brands do that because we have one inventory hub and we're servicing 55 countries. But at least from our point of view, there's been a really big push to go global, potentially because of tariffs, and potentially because it's just getting easier to do it.
Yeah, I'm curious. Just sort of segue on the topic of tariffs. Obviously, that's this year that was I was going to say probably, but certainly the biggest supply chain story. Izzy, you're kind of at the heart of that. Madeline, I'd also be curious to kind of understand how tariffs have impacted your business as well. But Izzy, I'm curious. Um, Obviously we've been on a roller coaster this year with kind of on again, off again, higher, lower. It seems like the last couple of months things have maybe plateaued, for at least the moment, which is good. Probably higher than we all wish, but we all wish for certainty, so at least we can plan accordingly. So I'm curious, looking ahead to next year to 2026, what are your thoughts on kind of the tariff landscape? What's some advice that you're giving brands on how they think about, the impact of tariffs and kind of further international expansion?
Yeah, I think certainty is the key word there. So, like this past year, there was so much uncertainty, and it was a disaster from manufacturing. How much are you doing ahead of time? How much do you need now? How much closer to season? So the uncertainty was definitely, very disruptive this year. But to your point, going next year, there's a lot more certainty. But I would also add that in manufacturing hubs. So when the trade war started, we had a lot of our brands like, oh, we're going to start doing India. We're going to start doing Vietnam. And they started manufacturing there. But almost everyone came back to China because there's so much certainty. If a factory tells you I'll get 50,000 units by X day, 98% of the time they deliver. And I was just talking to a big brand right before this call. He was pushing into India, and he says the problem is they always say yes, and they can't give that certainty because they couldn't deliver on time. So I think with the tariffs of Vietnam, wasn't as good as people thought. India is actually quite high. There's overall certainty that things are where they will be, and they won't get much worse. We're actually seeing a really interesting stuff to people that made bets are coming back to China. So they get back that certainty. So they have certainty in tariffs, and now they need certainty in supply chain. And that's at least the shift we're seeing.
And we saw exactly the same thing, by the way, Izzy. Many people, they didn't realize the supply chain wasn't going to follow with them into
Right.
India and Vietnam, and actually ended up being much more complicated. So just eat the tariffs and make your life easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to an investor this morning. Was having coffee, and she was looking at a new, very early stage marketplace that helps companies source for manufacturers domestically, here in the United States. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I actually haven't seen that exactly, right? I know of models that help you find, source partners in China or overseas. I also know lots of co-mans and co-packers domestically. But to source a manufacturer, I thought like, kind of like what you're saying, Izzy, what you were sort of alluding to, like, there's a reason why I'm looking around my desk here. Most things on my desk were from China and will continue to be from China. And someone I follow on Twitter, and his name is Molson Hart, and maybe some of you follow him as well. He's really an exceptional follow, and I remember a few months ago during like the height of tariff craziness, he was posting essentially his unit economics and his COGS to make his product, which is called Brain Flakes, and they sell a lot on Amazon. It's like a kid's toy, kind of like a puzzle piece. Anyways, he was saying it was something to the magnitude of tariffs in China would have to be upwards of 400% for it to be less expensive, not even less complicated, just less expensive to produce it in the United States, right? Like it's just like China does things really, really well. So, unfortunately or fortunately, that's not going away. And yeah, it's funny to kind of hear you validate a lot of that, Izzy, with the with from the brand's perspective as well. Madeline, curious how tariffs have impacted, your day to day and, how you're sort of envisioning, changes or, how you're planning accordingly heading into the new year.
Yeah, I agree in terms of, our vendors in China are fantastic to work with, extremely reliable. Luckily, we are um, slightly insulated from a lot of the tariff changes, especially impacting China, because mostly it's only our componentry that's made in China, and our finished goods are produced in North America and Europe. But that's not to say that it's not without its challenges, and it's made a huge financial impact on us, even if it's just componentry. Really feel for my fellow operators that are exclusively manufacturing in countries that have been really hit hard by and so much uncertainty at that. It's been really, really challenging for operators out there to strategically envision what they're doing next. That being said, we've had single continent sourcing on our roadmap for a long time. It is not an easy feat at all. And of course, our Chinese vendors are extremely compelling in keeping our business. So it'll be interesting to see how we make progress in our single continent sourcing strategy next year and beyond. But we also understand it's not a quick, easy change to make, and really feel for the smaller brands out there that are really contingent on those vendors that have been really hit by tariffs, because it is extremely hard to sustain and survive in such an uncertain market.
Yeah, absolutely. Mo, I want to segue to another topic, past tariffs. Given that Pipe17 um, sees a lot of brands as back end operations, brands like
Mhm.
Madeline's, and I think if I recall, Portless is a customer of Pipe17 as well. So you have a
Happy
view into
customer. They're great.
great. Um, so you have a view
Thank you.
into kind of like
Yeah,
the tech stack of Portless as well. So I'm
yeah,
curious, given I think you said you work with thousands of brands, so you see a lot. Like,
yeah,
what do you
yeah,
in your opinion, what sort of separates those brands that sort of scale smoothly through that million in revenue, 10 million in revenue, 50 million,
yeah.
to those that begin to hit a wall on the technical side of the house?
Yes,
And I think Madeline alluded to some challenges the team was facing
yeah,
earlier this year as well.
yeah. Look, I think that is the question. I think kind of standing kind of one level up. I think as entrepreneurs, we focus a lot on customer acquisition and sales, right? Because that's effectively what everybody does out of the book, because every dollar that you make is an extra dollar on the top line. The reality of it is that, in a business that's selling physical goods, inventory is a huge cost, right? And so operations at the end of the day, is really around trying to optimize that inventory and figuring out what you need, when you need it, what to order, and all these kind of things. So I think, in terms of the evolution of brands, I think, it's an obvious thing to say, but I think, when you start out versus when you're a $1 billion brand, if you start out with a horse and you're going 7 miles an hour, you know, if you're 20 times bigger, 20 horses are not going to get you to 140 miles an hour, right? And I think part of it is you just have to revisit how you do things at different stages. And I think in general, kind of at least one simplistic thing we've seen is, in terms of operations and infrastructure evolution, many brands, they start out, Shopify seems to be the most common choice they do there. They, choose a 3PL and, they ship from the US, or they adopt some other model like Izzy's model, where they're actually shipping in pretty well sometimes as quick a time from elsewhere. But certainly it's kind of Shopify plus fulfillment, and then somebody's telling them, look, you need to manage your money, so QuickBooks, right? So that kind of stack is kind of that starting stack, which is like, a few million GMV maybe. But I think as brands evolve, they go to what I call from kind of starting out to mid-cycle, which is, typically doing 5 million, maybe up to 20, maybe 15 to 20. They're still running Shopify. They probably kind of want to do another channel by Amazon there. Many do. And if they do Amazon, for sure, they're going to do, fulfilled by Amazon, and most people do. And you're going to end up with multiple fulfillment locations. And then, things are getting complicated enough where you go in with a kind of mini ERP, Sin Sevens of the world, Bright Pearls of the world. There are 1,000 of these things, right? And I think as you start to go from kind of mid-cycle to scale, which is typically 25 million, 50 million plus, you probably have multiple distribution centers. You probably do drop ship, which includes from abroad. And, you have multiple selling channels. And on the ERP side, I mean, as much as, everybody in the industry says differently, you end up doing NetSuite, Acumatic, or Dynamics. If I look at like all our customer base, 9/10 of them are in that bucket, right? At scale, right? Now, the next step from that kind of like scale is enterprise. And there's all SAP, right? So just taking that one off the table, the reality of it is, I think, as you're thinking about your operational infrastructure, you've got this transition from like the starting out point, mid-cycle, scale, and then enterprise. And I think people don't think about it thoroughly enough in terms of they still try to operate $50 million brands on QuickBooks. Does not work, especially if you're manufacturing some of your goods. And they try to push these mini ERPs beyond what they're designed for, right? And at the end of the day, your finance guys, especially if you want to sell your business, they kind of want you to run on something they understand. So I think that's kind of what we've seen mostly in terms of that evolution and how people think about it. But more people need to think about it this way is the point, not just carry on doing what you're doing with spreadsheets, because you need to be very deliberate, as Madeline kind of mentioned earlier as well.
Yeah, I'm curious, Madeline, kind of related to that question. Like what is one thing or a couple things that you think are definitely dying in e-commerce operations, in the coming months or in the next, year or so? Like, is there something that, I don't know, whether it's, as Mo said, kind of the whole like $50 million a year QuickBooks company like that parent doesn't work. So, yeah, I'm curious, what's maybe one or two things that you can think of that you think will be a lot less next year in our sort of world of e-commerce operations?
Single channel selling for sure. If you are a D2C brand and you're doing 10 to 15 million, you need to be automatically thinking about omni-channel. And that doesn't mean, retail, brick and mortar, anything like that, but you need to be thinking about Amazon, TikTok, Marketplace, Ulta Marketplace. There are so many different options right now. And if you're already on Shopify, so many of those marketplaces plug into Shopify and can get you up and running in 2 weeks. I think that what we are learning, especially as we move out of the, 2022 Instagram heyday, is that customers are in different places. Your .com customer is not necessarily your Amazon customer, is not necessarily your TikTok customer. So, ignoring how easy it is to implement omnichannel, not to say that Amazon is easy, but there are so many options out there that we even are really taking a hard look at. I think we were much more agnostic to putting our brand out and being very kind of specialized in how we want our brand to be seen. But now we're really thinking about how do we make sure that the customer that's there on the market is seeing our product and is able to buy it. If you're not adapting to that, then you're already behind the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like multi-channel or omni-channel is almost like one of those. I mean, it's a buzzword, but there's a lot of truth to it, right? And I think Harley Finkelstein, the president of Shopify, he always says that like there's no such thing as like you can't call it e-commerce, right? Like it's all commerce, right? Like your customer might be going on your, direct website. They might be buying your product on Amazon. They might be buying your product on Main Street, USA, walking down the street. They might be in a big box retailer. They might be on Instacart or DoorDash or GoPuff, right? I was talking to a small beauty brand the other day based here in Nashville, and my perception was you can only purchase their product in their single brick and mortar store here in town or on their website, on their Shopify website. And I was talking to their ops manager, and he was like, "No, we can actually get your product to you in 20 minutes in Dallas, right? I live in Nashville. We can get your product to you in 20 minutes in Dallas." And I said, "Hold, like Amazon can't even do that. How do you do that?" He said, "Well, we work through the Dash Mart, DoorDash's kind of proprietary, convenience store, which can get product to you in 20 minutes. And they're also on GoPuff. I was like, holy crap, that absolutely, right? That makes a ton of sense. But a few years ago, it was impossible for that small beauty brand, that small brand to get product to the end customer in minutes. But now it's possible through relationships with, the Ubers and the DoorDashes and the GoPuffs and the Instacarts and all these other sort of on-demand channels. So it really is, fascinating that, of all the different channels that are available where consumers are shopping. It's not single channel to your point, Madeline. Um, Izzy, curious on the international side. I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but looking ahead to 2026, are you seeing brands, double down on certain markets, certain geographies? Are there certain countries that are kind of, sleeper e-com countries, or yeah, what are you seeing in the sort of non-US context?
Great question. I would say it's a common misconception that going global is very hard. It really isn't. Most products could be sold globally. Yes, there's like, I need a VAT number, I need IOSS number, I need to file it. There's great service providers out there. I'll call Zonos is a famous one of our partners. You could really be up and running and selling globally so quickly. And the examples I gave, some of our fastest growing brands, you just got to make that decision. You work with one or two solution partners, and I think this world we live in today, there's so much leverage with a couple key SaaS providers. All of a sudden, you could be going global, and there was brands doing between 50 and 100 million that we service, and now 40%, in some months more than 40% is outside the US. So it is a very big world. Your customers are not only omni-channel, but they're literally everywhere in the world. There is consumer everywhere, and not selling to them and to doing the little setup work for massive outcomes is, I think it'd be crazy to miss for brands. I would say there is interesting stuff happening around the world from a de minimis perspective. So we know it went away in the US, and arguably, I think for Portless was very good because there was a lot of like, oh, what happens when de minimis goes away? No, it went away, and we're doing more business today than we were doing prior to de minimis. But you're seeing that trend everywhere. Like Europe was supposed to be 2028. It actually might be mid 26. Law passed in January
Oh,
to go away
yeah.
in mid 2026. So while that sounds scary, our argument is actually it's good. The de minimis in Europe was only 150 euros, meaning if you couldn't do that, then you couldn't leverage a lot of these cheaper parcel methods like we do, like $5 shipping at a quarter pound and going out from there. So it will be a commercial entry similar to the US model, but it's crazy to not be pushing. And we've seen it, like brands almost double in size by opening global markets.
Yeah. And we saw the same thing, by the way, is at the beginning when the tariffs things hit. I mean, many manufacture in China. Those goods, certainly on the EU perspective, are somewhat compliant or can be made to be compliant. And many start out with just selling on Amazon, right? In which case, and extending that omni-channel into Shopify and having their own website, Europe. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
Uh, Mo, while we have you, I want to talk about tech stack bloat. I think that's
Yes.
real.
Yes.
I'm curious, what technologies or tools do you think will get cut from e-commerce operations next year? Over the next few months here, particularly in light of as brands continue to tighten their budgets and
Yeah.
get smarter about kind of costs across their business. Yeah,
Yeah.
what do you think
Yeah.
is going to be sort of first to cut?
Yeah. So I think I want to start out with who's going to have momentum and who's at what cost is that going to be. So look, I think it won't come as a surprise to anybody, but Shopify has a lot of momentum on the cart side, right? And I think, if you look at what, they announced with Estee Lauder, but also with other enterprise companies, for sure they are pushing heavily into that domain. So for anybody that's kind of not running Shopify, the question in the market is why not, right? So I think that's just one clear one. Now, this simplification wave, which I honestly think commerce is going through this simplification wave where anybody sitting is like, why am I using 10, 20, 100, 200 tools? That simplification wave, Shopify is a data point in, but there are other data points within that as well. So I would expect to see things like personalization, CMS, on-site search just go sideways. Those things are just going to become maybe to some extent collateral damage. So I think those are things I think that over time you're going to see people do less of, because I think that's one of the things that ultimately the simplification wave, which everybody is on, because it makes life simpler, and making life simpler means it costs less money as well because you have less tools around and all these kind of things. So I think that one is a clear one. The other one, I think, certainly in our world, is if you think about kind of post-order capture, there's a lot of custom development. People write code, they use development tools, they use, integration platforms, and it's just not sustainable, because I think the combination of, SIs who, add value, but it's expensive, and then you add development tools, even more expensive, buying out of the box solutions for order operations like Pipe17 or other order management systems, I think certainly sets people up well. So I do expect to see pressure on custom development, right, as we go through, and that's going to turn, SIs into more strategic partners for businesses out there. And I think ultimately people are going to ask, like, look, if something's going to improve my conversion by like 1%, why do the headache, right? And one thing that should not fall to the wayside is inventory visibility. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but I fundamentally believe this is the biggest cost in the commerce business. And I think anything that stands in the way of getting good visibility, I think, should come to the wayside.
I love that. No, thanks, Mel. Um, Definitely a huge supporter of Shopify, and I came across a brand recently that was not on Shopify, and I tend to be generally non-technical, but I was like, why? What are you doing? Right? I think
Yeah.
the 10 biggest brands that have not yet been born, that will be born in 2026, my guess is nine of those 10 will be born on Shopify. Right? You're just yeah, you're setting yourself up for failure, if you're not on
Yeah.
Shopify. Given, I think Madeline mentioned it earlier. I think it was you, Madeline, who mentioned that there's, especially with all these other sales channels, where
Yeah.
customers are, Shopify makes it just so darn easy to
Super easy.
plug into them, as well as their app ecosystem. So, yeah, certainly
Yeah.
a huge Shopify proponent here. Um, Madeline, I know ILIA Beauty's been around. I think 2011 was when the company was founded.
Mhm.
So about 15, yeah, about 15 years now, and you guys have scaled phenomenally well, and what is a really competitive category, beauty. So what operational capability or decisions have been most like critical to the success of your growth over the last couple of years, and maybe what decision was made that didn't turn out so well? What sort of broke along the way?
Yeah, it's a great question. Two things really. I think so. We really started to see our rocket ship growth in 2020. It was kind of a perfect storm, right? Everybody was looking at their phones. Nobody had anything to do. It was the height of COVID, and people also were becoming, there were two things that were happening. They were becoming more aware of what they were putting in and out on their bodies. And they were also really looking for inclusion and equity in how they were being marketed. And those were things that ILIA was already doing. The customer just found us kind of at the perfect moment. When COVID hit, though, we, like a lot of other brands, said this year is going to suck. And we had just gone through a huge investment funding series. So we decided let's batten down the hatches and let's implement the tech stack that we need for the next 5 years of growth. Well, to our surprise, the month before we started our NetSuite implementation, we had our first $1 million month. And that took us completely by surprise. There was a lot of really kind of special magic that allowed us to sustain that momentum. But really, it was two things from an operational perspective. We did that tech stack investment really early, and we onboarded the big guns. We did Shopify, Celigo, NetSuite. We moved to a big 3PL. all in that year. And that really allowed us to have the tools at scale to get us through that rocket ship growth and into really enterprise planning. So that was huge for us. Now we're going back for another look at our tech stack and refining it now that our rocket ship growth phase is over. We're still growing at a great rate, but it's leveled off and we're a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more predictable. But in addition to that, it was really about understanding what our volume looked like as we were scaling through our warehouses. So we were in a storage unit in 2019. And then we moved to a big 3PL in 2020, but we were in their small building. And it really became a big conversation and making sure that we understood exactly what we needed to get us into the bigger building. We got into the bigger building, but when it came time for a contract renewal, we understood that we had a huge opportunity to save a very large amount of money by making a difficult change and going into a different 3PL. That was a hard decision to make because we really enjoyed our 3PL at the time, but the cost savings we just could not ignore. That being said, that move to that 3PL almost did break us. It was a huge inflection point. A lot of things broke for us along the way. If we could have been more prepared for it, we were. We were also expanding into the Canadian market at the same time. It was incredibly hectic for reasons that were in and way beyond our control. If I could go back with a magic wand, I would definitely do it a little bit differently, but we persevered. We got through that first year and we're much better off for it.
Yeah, if I had a nickel for every time I heard someone say that their transition to a new 3PL did not go well, I'd probably be retired. Um, uh, which is unfortunate because my business is really focused on helping brands transition from one 3PL to another. So I enjoy when that happens, but yeah, it's I think you hit the nail on the head, Madeline, where it's being prepared. It's a really difficult move. But I'm glad you're in a good place now. Um, we have just about 5 minutes. If anyone, any of the attendees have a question, feel free to pop into the chat and we'll try to get to it. I have just a couple more questions, for the group here. Um, I'm not sure. I don't think we've mentioned the term, the word AI. This would be a really failed session if we don't name drop AI in there. So maybe we'll talk about it for a minute here. I'm curious, maybe going around the horn here. What's actually useful in e-commerce operations today versus what's still vaporware or not yet, fully baked? Curious if anyone wants to jump in there.
I can have a go. So I think the useful stuff, for people who do custom development, I mean, anybody who has a development tool like Celigo or website development, I think AI is definitely useful. Whether you're doing it, the agency is doing it, somebody's doing it. So I think we've seen as a software company significant productivity improvements in using AI in development, and I think that's going to continue. It's a well understood problem. I think, on the vaporware side, AI-based personalization, clippy personalization, chatbots and assistants and all these kind of things to me are vaporware. I think the other thing, we haven't talked about agentic either, Matt, so we have to drop that word in. But on agentic commerce, I think one of the things that people miss is they're like, well, nobody's going to check out on ChatGPT. And I think that's not the point. I think every brand wants to be discoverable. And for people who go in to do discovery via ChatGPT, which I did for a whole bunch of things actually recently, you want to be discoverable. So I think that's the first thing to think about. So instead of passing an opinion on whether you think you want people to check out on ChatGPT or not, focus on making sure your stuff turns up to a new audience. I mean, the same way that Madeline mentioned that part of the omni-channel experience is that you do connect with new audiences, people you haven't marketed to before, people you didn't know were going to be buyers of your products. And I think thinking of it that way versus saying, yeah, chat, AI checkout, nobody's going to do it, so therefore I'm not investing in it, I'm not interested in it, I think is a mistake.
I
I'm
appreciate
happy
that.
to a little bit on my end. We're seeing a lot of it from like a data perspective, going through data, summarizing data for us, helping us make better decisions of like what channels, which products, what injection points. But I would say there's a lot of a lot of noise out there. Most of it is for us still noise. Um, Obviously everyone's using ChatGPT in the company. We have an equivalent tool for like business data. All our data goes into a single equivalent. It's called Jigsaw. It kind of stores all your data. You ask it questions, kind of our internal ChatGPT. But I would say those are the two main areas and development, right? Cursor and like the equivalents. Those are, I guess, the three buckets we're seeing major usage.
From my side, we are seeing some really great success with AI chatbots and agents from a CX
Yeah.
perspective. We don't want AI chatbots to replace our fantastic CX team, but we do want it to help with the heavy lifting on things that are, repetitive tasks and easy to connect between our systems to get the customer the answer that they need as fast as possible. We know that those customers that are using those chatbots, there's limitations to them, but they're looking for the answer that the chatbot can provide, and we have the ability to step in and provide the right customer experience when, the chatbot's not going to cut it. On the flip side, I'm seeing a lot of inventory tools that promise a completely like hands-off approach, and there is in no way, shape, or form that I think it's appropriate to be completely hands off on that inventory management. You absolutely need a human looking at trends that I think some of these companies are promising that they can just do with the snap of a finger, and we're
Yeah.
not comfortable with that yet.
There's no
Yeah,
magic.
yeah, exactly.
It won't replace us yet.
Yeah, I know Mo, you split some of your time in Seattle, and that big company up there, Amazon, they are probably among the leaders in inventory management. And I would suspect that they have multiple buildings in Seattle of teams of people who are just humans that are focused on inventory management, despite all the systems that they use, internally to manage that. So, yeah, absolutely, Madeline. Agree with that. Just a final question that we got here, and then I'll let everyone get back to their mornings or afternoon. But yeah, just kind of a final bold prediction here. What happens in e-commerce or logistics in 2026 that most people aren't expecting?
I'll take that one first. And you already mentioned it, Matt, hyperlocal fulfillment. It's the way
Yes.
forward. You want to get your ILIA skin tint with your lunch, and I want you to have it too. I think that's something that everyone needs to be really looking at to get your customer, when they're already shopping for something, get them the product they need when they want it.
Love that. Mo or Izzy?
Uh,
So
we want to
go
go
ahead,
first?
Izzy.
All right.
No, go ahead.
I would say last mile delivery is going through a major shift. USPS was the default for small package.
Uh-huh.
Companies like Uni and GoFo and all these other ones are doing millions of deliveries a day, and they're excellent. They weren't great in the beginning, but they're excellent now
Excellent.
with picture on delivery. USPS is in a lot of trouble. I think they're going to service the Alaskas, Hawaii's, and all the annoying zip codes, but I think it'll be better for consumers, better for brands. People will save money. Not great for USPS, but I think over the next 1 year and years to come, you're going to see a very different last mile delivery industry.
And maybe one kind of closing thought from me. Something called the Order Network Exchange. This is something that was launched a few weeks ago, and
Hmm.
it is to standardize the way order data flows in commerce. And it's absolutely crazy that nothing's existed today to standardize the way a selling channel gives an order to a fulfillment solution, gives the order to an ERP. So this was launched 3 weeks ago. There are like 80 companies already committed, people like Manhattan, IBM, and a whole bunch of other companies. I think this is going to get a lot of momentum, and already has. And I think every brand and retailer should ask their 3PL, their logistics provider, and their service provider, are they Onyx compliant? Because that is the big thing that's going to make the difference for next year.
I love that. Well, feel free to connect with Mo and Izzy and Madeline on LinkedIn. I know they're available there. I'm sure they'd love to chat. Feel free to also message me if you want me to connect you with them. Thanks everyone for attending. Thank you, Izzy, Mo, and Madeline, for being panelists. we should have this up on our YouTube channel in the next day or so, and we'll be emailing everyone links to the replay and some shorts. So thanks everyone. Good luck the final, I guess, 3 weeks of the year here, and have a great rest of the afternoon here.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you,
Thanks
Matt. So thank
everyone.
you, everybody. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Have a good one. Bye.